Hey everybody, welcome back to our continuing coverage of the 159th anniversary of the Battle of Gettysburg, and we're standing on one of my favorite parts of the battlefield here in the Wheatfield. We'll see a lot of action taking place in this area on July 2nd, 1863, and I'm so excited to welcome back our special guest. You've seen her before for years gone by. It's Dr. Carol Reardon. She's with the Gettysburg Foundation up here in Gettysburg, one of our great partners. Check out their website and go over to the visitor center and learn more about what they do. They also now have the Children of Gettysburg exhibit open up on Baltimore Avenue. So if you want to head down there and check that out, they're always up to something really good. We're friends with Wayne Motts, the CEO, President and CEO of the Gettysburg Foundation. So we're really excited. We've had Wayne on. We have Carol out here with us. And Carol also is an author, a historian. Check out her book on Pickett's Charge. It's one of my favorites. Or also check out her book on Jomny and the Civil War, talking about the tactics of the time. If you're really, really nerdy like I am, that was a book that I really like to see come out. So Carol, please tell us where we are. I know we're in the Wheatfield and who we're going to talk about here while we're in my favorite part of the battlefield.
Well, okay, Chris, I'll do that. Any Gettysburg scholar or fan of Gettysburg who is being honest, when you say the Wheatfield, they all kind of go, oh, geez, because nobody can figure out the fighting here. If you're being honest, you hate to admit it, but it's tough. And so when Gary recruited me for this season, he said, we want unusual regiments and people you never heard of. Easy to do down here. There's a lot of regiments here that we don't get a chance to talk about too much, and a lot of fascinating individuals. If we just take a look around this place, this Wheatfield, Mr. Rose's Wheatfield, I'm sure he never anticipated what was going to happen in this little plot of ground. We talk about Little Round Top, and we focus so much on that, and in about 90 minutes of fighting, there were about 1,200 casualties up there. Devil's Den and all the magnificent rocks and all the rehabilitation work going on over there right now. About 90 minutes of fighting and about 1,800 casualties there. The Wheatfield, about 90 minutes of fighting and 6,000 to 7,000 casualties here. It must have been absolutely mind-blowing to be caught up in the middle of it. And that's really what I think the story of the Wheatfield is. It's not organized lines moving back and forth. It's utter and total chaos, experienced most often on an individual soldier's level. And that's why I want to introduce you to two soldiers we just don't get to hear that much about. Where we're standing right now, well, right over my shoulder over here, it's not too hard to look over my head or to look over my shoulder, and there you'll see it, Mr. Rose's farm. That was a little bit of a gap in the line. When General Sickles was putting his 3rd Corps line forward, he put one division along the Emmetsburg Road, and the other half of the line angled back from the Peach Orchard to the Wheatfield off to Devil's Den, and then it pretty much stopped. The troops that were assigned here to the Wheatfield must have felt like they were down in the bottom of a bowl. It's a very isolated place. You don't even sense the presence of troops off to your right and to your left. And so when the fighting began here, between Anderson's Georgians and some of de Trobriand's 3rd Corps Brigade, already being reinforced by other men from the 3rd Corps and even some of the 5th Corps, the fighting is very contained and very vicious and very bitter. The troops I want to introduce you to today are not in that first wave, and they aren't in the last wave with the Pennsylvania Reserves of the U.S. Regulars. This is sort of the middle of the fight. And the Southerner I want to introduce you to is the colonel commanding the 7th South Carolina Infantry. His name is Colonel David Wyatt Aiken. Now, Colonel Aiken is one of these dyed-in-the-wool Southerners who believed in the Southern cause even before Fort Sumter. He was born in the upcountry of South Carolina. He owned a plantation. There were at least 40 slaves on his property. He became a public speaker in support of the institution of slavery in the late 1850s, before secession was being argued about and before the Civil War was on the near horizon. He was already involved in those kinds of causes. And right after Fort Sumter, he is going to enlist as a private soldier in the ranks. He was a little bit older. He was a college graduate, but he had no problems volunteering as a private to serve. Very quickly, he was promoted to adjutant of the 7th South Carolina, and after first Bull Run, he was elected to serve as colonel. He is a tough battlefield commander, and in fact, at Antietam, he is wounded near the Dunker Church, hit in the lung so bad that they don't think he's going to live. but he does recover, and he is able to return to the 7th South Carolina just before the Pennsylvania campaign begins. When he marches here into the Wheatfield, he commands the 7th South Carolina's 408 men that almost all come from the upcountry of South Carolina, and it's considered a tough regiment. It was called the Fighting 7th, and there was a good reason for it. They're on the right flank, and Kershaw's job and Aiken's job is to connect somehow with Hood's division, wherever that might be. Now that connection's supposed to be somewhere out in this area. We know that Anderson's brigade out of Hood's division is right off to my right, at least, and I'm sure they were looking for a connection, but the fighting's going to develop so quickly that the connection is never quite made. Now, Colonel Aiken is going to write a letter dated on about the 6th of July. We don't know quite to whom he intended to send it. It's addressed to Dear Captain. It's not his after-action report, because some of his language makes very clear he's expressing his own opinion in his own unique style. But it's a really intense letter just the same. What he explains is simply this. Behind me you can see the little knob of ground that usually gets called the Stony Hill, and we usually connect that with the fight of the Irish Brigade. Well, before the Irish Brigade gets involved, this is a fight between Zook's brigade in the Union Army and several regiments out of Kershaw's South Carolina Brigade. The 3rd and the 7th, South Carolina in particular, are going to have their fight on that hill right behind us here. Well, Colonel Aiken is going to tell us about that fight, and he's going to say it was some of the most intense fighting he had ever seen. And he was on the right flank, and they're moving into the area, the ground that's basically right in front of us, when the worst possible thing that can happen to a unit in battle happens. Some reinforcements are moving up, Semmes's brigade, and there's a South Carolina regiment attached to Semmes's brigade, and they open fire on the Union soldiers that they can see down here, but their aim is not very good, and some of their bullets end up hitting soldiers in the rear rank of the 7th South Carolina right in front of them. One of the worst sensations you can have is taking fire from the rear, and when you realize it's coming from your own troops, that's about as bad as it can be. Let me read a little bit from Colonel Aiken's letter, because he has a felicity of expression that is really kind of fun to hear. The 15th South Carolina fired over or at us, we never could tell, and wounded many of my men. We drove the enemy easily until then, when my men, feeling the effects of the balls from the rear, began to waver. I drew them back some 100 yards, rallied them again. Sims came up. We poured it into the enemy, and I love this phrase coming up here, and in a few minutes the blue whelps were tooling off. When in the world have you ever heard a Civil War officer write a report that includes a phrase like, the blue whelps went tooling off? I don't think you're going to find one, but it tells you an awful lot about this guy's mindset. The Yankees were running, and Aiken is loving every bit of it. The whole fight from the moment of the infantry met was not more than half an hour, and I have never seen the same destruction on both sides in any battle before. After this campaign, Aiken's going to decide that his old Antietam wound really took more out of him than he realized, and he's going to ask for duty behind the lines. He'll command the Confederate post at Macon, Georgia. When the war is over, he is going to return to South Carolina. He's going to get involved in local politics. He wants to override the Reconstruction government. Ultimately, in 1877, he will be elected to Congress as a Democrat from South Carolina, and he will serve for 10 years and will die in office. He was unreconstructed to the end. He's the kind of colonel, the kind of officer who served steadily as long as his physical capacity allowed him to do, and he would never, ever, ever think about such things as reconciliation or accept any kind of idea that the Southern cause was anything but a noble one. He's that quintessential lost cause officer. But it makes us think about the soldiers he was fighting against. And an awful lot of the soldiers that the 7th South Carolina ran into came from General Samuel K. Zook's brigade, Pennsylvanians and New Yorkers. And they came along this little ridge, and we can pan over and see a little ridge. It's on the west side. It's on the west side of the Wheatfield here. And mostly what they're trying to do is to clear off the Confederates, Kershaw's men, some of Anderson's men, and retake that ground for the Union cause. The soldier whose story I want to tell you about here is a very unusual case. When I first ran across his case, it gave me pause because I was really trying to respect the sentimentality of his brothers-in-arms when they wrote about this later. The soldier's name was William Devoe. He belongs to Company B of the 57th New York Infantry in Zook's brigade. He enlisted in October 1861 in Utica, New York. He is not a young man caught up in the patriotism of the day. He is 44 years old when he enlists. So he is a man of maturity who probably gave a great deal of thought to his decision to enlist. Once he enlisted, he proved to be a steady, good, solid soldier for almost the first 2 years of his service. But something happened here. There are an awful lot of stories about just the unusually brutal nature of the fighting here in the Wheatfield that shook soldiers who were previously known to be steady fighters. And apparently William Devoe is one of them. He left the ranks. At some point in the fight, he just simply had had enough, and he left. Now, he didn't run away to the point where the provost marshal had to go after him. There were not agents of the government out looking for him back home in New York. He basically turned around, came back to his unit, reported back into his officers, and asked to be returned to duty. But he had left ranks in the middle of the battle, and those kinds of actions do have consequences. And so the officers in the 57th had no choice but to arrest Private Devoe and submit him to the exercise of the military justice system. He was going to be court-martialed. He was going to be found guilty. He was going to be sentenced to execution. And even though his officers tried to pursue a presidential pardon, because we know Lincoln offered many presidential pardons, no pardon ever came through. On December 18th, 1863, less than 6 months after the Battle of Gettysburg, in a field near their winter encampment down in Virginia, Private William Devoe was executed by firing squad in the presence of his entire former command. He is the only Union soldier that we have record of who was arrested, tried, convicted, and executed for desertion in the face of the enemy here at Gettysburg. He gives us pause, I think, to think about the nature of courage. Military historians debate the nature of courage a great deal. There are some who say basically that courage is something that you have until you don't have it. And they say some people never have it. There is one military historian who said, a man's courage is his capital, and he is always spending it. And when it's gone, it's gone. Was that the case of Private Devoe here? He had just gotten to the point where he had used up all of his capital, all of his courage, and could not go anymore. We don't know what the answer is there. There are others who say that courage is a renewable kind of a thing where you might find yourself low on it, but if you are surrounded by friends who are committed to the cause, if your officers promote all kinds of good morale, make sure that you're fed and paid, and encourage you to remember what the cause is all about and find ways to motivate you, that you can refill your stock of courage and continue on to fight. It's something that military historians have debated about and the professional soldiers think about still today. We can't resolve that here and now, but for Private Devoe, the consequences of his leaving the front on July 2nd in 1862 ultimately makes him one of the last casualties of the Battle of Gettysburg. Come to Gettysburg and meet even more soldiers with these incredible stories to tell us, and enjoy your visit and reflect upon what you learn here.
Carol, that was fantastic. We really appreciate you being here. And I think something to remember here too is that the troops she's talking about are all veterans. The 7th South Carolina, they had seen action all the way up from Antietam to Fredericksburg, Maurice Heights at the Stonewall. They actually fought against some of the soldiers in Zook's brigade there. They go on to the wilderness and fight there. At Chancellorsville, Zook's brigade is one of the rear guards of the Army. So, you know, there's a lot of veteran units out there. And like Carol said, sometimes that cup fills up, according to one historian, and then, you know, that's as far as it can go with the courage. But Carol, we really thank you for being out here today. And check out Carol and Tom Vossler's book about Gettysburg. There's a great tour guide. You also have one for Antietam as well, so you can check that out over on Amazon.com. Check out the Gettysburg Foundation. Head down to the Rupp House and learn about the children of 1863. Head over to the Gettysburg Visitor Center, the National Park Visitor Center, and engage with the foundation there. And do check out the Sacred Trust talks that they have every anniversary. They bring in authors like Carol and historians like Gary Edelman on our staff. I've spoken there in the past and others, and it's a great way to engage with history. And we encourage you to come out here, walk in the footsteps of where we are out here in the Wheatfield, and walk in the footsteps of many of those soldiers who came across here in blue and gray.
And there's one more place that you ought to visit when you come here as well. The new Lincoln train station that's opening up has just opened up. If you have ever enjoyed a virtual reality dip into history, this is Gettysburg's first virtual reality opportunity. Come and learn about the people, interesting people, civilians, military folks, a local black resident who had a lot to do with the burial of the Union and Confederate dead. A lot of their stories are waiting for you at the new Lincoln train station.
I'm glad you brought that up, and that's the train station down across from the world-famous Lincoln Diner on Carlisle Street. So where Lincoln ate before he went to give his Gettysburg address. No, not really.
No, don't do that.
But it's right across the street from
We're great
the Lincoln
believers
Diner.
in history, really.
We are, but you gotta have fun doing it too. So be sure to go down there and check it out. And also while you're down there, check out the Wills House, which is right on the square as well. So there's all kinds of things to do and see here in Gettysburg, not just for the anniversary, but year round. So on behalf of the American Battlefield Trust and the Gettysburg Foundation, I'm Chris White. Thank you for watching, and thank you for supporting Battlefield education.